Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our Social Innovation Lunch series. Today, I'm very excited to have my colleague, and we were kind of joking a little bit because there was a time and place when she was a student in one of my classes, and then now she's the expert who I learned from, so I'm super excited to have her and invite her back to campus and for her to share her work. So we're just going to sit here. We're going to have a conversation. As part of that conversation, she's going to answer questions, some with slides, some without slides, and we'd be happy to, as you have particular questions as we're going along, in terms of, especially this introduction, I'll pause and kind of get your input on that. I'll ask a couple of questions, then you can share some questions, and we'll get you out by one. So again, thank you for joining us. So Wilma, tell us a little bit about the South Los Angeles Collaborative, what you're trying to accomplish there.
Yes. So good afternoon. Thanks for having me. It's a joy to be back on campus. I always, take the opportunity. I'm a big nerd, so I always tell people, like, anytime I get, a chance to go back into the classroom, like, I'm there. So I'm Dr. Wilma Franco. I'm the director of the Southeast LA Collaborative. So we are a collective impact model. We're a network of 12 organizations that came together really out of the Bell scandal in government accountability challenges that the Southeast region was facing. So the Southeast region, I wanted to include the geographic piece here for you to, have a visual representation of where those cities are. So when we talk about really kind of uplifting our communities and having a vision to create, sustain collective power and really kind of create this movement in the region, we're talking about 8 cities and 2 unincorporated areas. So it's a pretty large region. It has historically been, kind of left out in terms of like resources. A lot of the reasons why the network came together was as a result of those challenges, but also realizing that there was not a lot of resources that were coming to this specific area. This area is also predominantly Latino. It's about 92% Latino, very high immigrant population. So these are our 12 members. So back in 2000, the initiative began as early as 2010, 2011, but it wasn't until about 2016 that it really got off the ground with the support of the Vanguard Foundation as well as Supervisor Hilda Solis. And then so we have grown from a 10-member organization to a 12-member organization, and they are the partners that kind of really lead some of the work, and I represent what we call the backbone structure, the backbone organization that leads the efforts and really kind of helps coordinate all the activities. We have identified 4 strategic priorities, one of which, regional identity is kind of embedded in everything that we're doing. So one of the biggest pieces for us was building the nonprofit capacity sector in the Southeast region. A lot of the information that we received and we knew based on the experience of our members working in this region was that there wasn't a lot of nonprofits there that were really kind of providing services to the communities, and those that were there were closing doors. And then so really kind of looking at how do we strengthen those nonprofits that exist, and how do we then ensure that they're sustainable over time. The other piece was really kind of grounded on civic engagement, like how do we, mobilize residents, educate them, make sure they're aware of the challenges in their communities, what they can do, about it, and how do we kind of really create this movement. And then the last piece for us was really kind of grounding everything on data and research. How do we utilize data to not only tell our story, but also the story of the region, and then have that data inform our strategy as we move forward in this area. So collective impact has been a model that as a collaborative we're exploring. We are, I think oftentimes, while we're coming together with different sectors, we have a lot of support from our private philanthropy as well as the public sector, like Supervisor Solis, Speaker Anthony Rendon, who are extremely supportive of the collaborative, have been key thought partners for us. There's also an acknowledgement that we may not be the traditional type of collective impact that may specifically focus on one topic or one city, right? But that we're looking at how do we build something that's going to really drive systemic change for this entire region. Most of the cities are extremely small. Maywood is about a 1 mile radius city, very overpopulated, but there's a lot of people that need support there, right? And have not had that support for many years. So how do we begin to kind of come together, different sectors, and really kind of move change in this area?
Well, let me ask a couple questions, and then I'll invite some for just to clarify and so forth. So you had mentioned at the end that you may or may not be viewed as a traditional collective impact initiative, and some of those reasons. I know that some of the students in the room are actually have read this article, maybe even, and as we know from this article, there's kind of 5 features that are described as features of collective impact per se, and then you added a couple of things that had to do with geography and or kind of systemic change versus kind of particular issue areas. So how do you see yourself specifically as kind of representing the features of collective impact? And certainly on your previous slide, many of them were represented, and those that you're either adding to or you're doing something different.
Yeah, so definitely I think one of the biggest pieces in collective impact is really kind of gathering people around this common vision and common identity, right? And that is definitely something that we as a collaborative have done, really grounding it on this regional identity piece in the Southeast. Like, how do we build the infrastructure not only of nonprofits but also the infrastructure when it comes to resident leaders, and really kind of mobilizing from the ground up. I think that part of collective impact also has to have community members as partners, right? And while we're still in the process of developing that, we're in that phase towards like, how do we begin to really kind of incorporate community voice? We have done so through our civic engagement work of really kind of hosting, charlas and community conversations around specific issues. For example, the census, right? Like educating our community, but also understanding what is it going to take to get you involved and to ensure that you participate, right? And then we use that data that we gather to really kind of inform, like, what do we as a collaborative want to take on as we move forward? I think the data piece is something that we're still very much trying to figure out, right? Like, there's a data that we need for ourselves to measure our own impact, and then there's the data of the community that then really kind of helps us advance the work. So I think that's the piece where, we're still very, very early on in the development of the collaborative. This is, we're entering our 3rd year, and we're kind of really exploring, like, what does this mean given everything that we have done? How is this going to inform our vision moving forward?
So I was just in kind of reflecting on some of the collaboratives that we've engaged with at the Center for Social Innovation, to your point about organizing around particular issue areas that some of them do. So the 2 LA Promise Zones, do work around housing stability, around educational attainment, workforce development, and so forth. So in their case, in one of the cases actually in South LA, they were required to identify those areas they were going to focus in before they even got the designation, whereas in the first case, they had the chance to kind of evolve and iterate on these kinds of things. Do you see that, given that you have these 12 partners, but yet you want to engage nonprofits, that that's something that you think would be helpful in your work long term, is to kind of pick a couple of areas to really, focus work in? Or do you feel like the more important thing for SELA is to actually operate at more of a meta level and think about the systemic changes within kind of how political power is represented in those kinds of things?
I would say a little bit of both, because I think we're very much, we're currently in the strategic planning stage for the next 3 years of the collaborative. And those are definitely questions that we're asking ourselves. I think the strategic priorities that were selected, nonprofit capacity building, civic engagement, are very, umbrella terms. A lot of, my understanding of how the collaborative evolved and why it reached the point of identifying those specific areas was because we recognize that all the partners at the table represent different, challenges and issues, but they're all extremely important. So it was very difficult for us to just say, okay, we're going to focus on this one thing and not really kind of acknowledge that they're all important. I think a lot of the work and what we really kind of allowed the data to drive how we would move forward was because we started with completing an asset-based analysis of the region, really kind of looking at the region as what are the assets here? What are things and opportunities that we may want to be, ahead of? And one of those pieces was transportation, and the other was census. And then so a lot of the work that we have done has been around these large investments that are coming to the region, like the West Santa Ana branch expansion, which is the Metro Rail, as well as the next gen bus study that's happening and will impact SELA because it heavily moves through buses, right? And this was something that we collaborated with Dr. Jen Giuliano, and really kind of grounding that, okay, well, this is extremely important and it has different implications. It's great to have investment, but it also could pose housing challenges. It could pose a number of other potential challenges that we need to be ahead of. And then so I think a lot of the data kind of guided us in that sense, and really looking at like how do we begin to capture all this to be able to then build a larger network and really kind of support the work that's already being done on the ground.
That's great. So certainly being data-driven, is an essential part of collective impact models. Is there anything that you've experienced in the context of SELA where you feel like the collective impact model doesn't actually capture what it is that you're trying to accomplish, and that maybe there's even some new emergent forms that you're wrestling with that you would it's early, I know.
Yeah.
You might know what's not working well versus what is.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we are kind of really experiencing right now is because we have been so flexible and just kind of like understanding, building relationships, the relationship piece I think is just essential to really kind of doing this work, right? Whether it's collective impact, whether it's any type of partnership, is the trust that you build, the relationships that you build. And what we realize is that coming into, especially for me, because I've been with the collaborative for a year and a half now, the history that I understood was there's not enough people doing work or enough organizations doing work. What we've found, because we actually completed a nonprofit needs assessment, it was a landscape analysis to see like how many people are actually in the region, what nonprofits. We found more than 560 nonprofits. So to say that there's not enough may not necessarily be true anymore. Right now we have the data to actually say, well, there's a lot of nonprofits, but it also provides us an opportunity to educate and say, well, when you say nonprofits, it also includes just a huge, diversity of organizations like the chambers, like, faith-based organizations. But if you narrow it down to what we have focused on, which is service providers, then yes, we have only 90 service provider organizations in SELA for a population of more than 450,000 people. And then so really kind of looking at those pieces and informing the work that we're doing, but realizing that building our network is going to be critical in also recognizing the work that's already being done by other partners in the area that we may not have known about, but have now, become aware of, right? Because I think that then continues to build, continues to allow the collaborative to build its trust in the community, but also kind of, model what, partnership and collaboration really looks like.
So I have one other question before I turn it out to the crowd, and this is a hard one you may not be able to fully answer in some ways, or maybe reticent to answer in some pieces. One of the challenges for many collective impact initiatives has to do with funding, and funding to what end. And so many traditional funding mechanisms might actually fund a particular kind of program, or it might find a capacity building effort, right, in some sense. But kind of the work you're trying to do goes beyond fitting into neat little categories. How have you seen funders kind of rethink how they do things in order to support your work, or what kind of ways have you presented information to funders in order to catalyze the joint work that's happening in SELA?
I think for the collaborative, we've been very fortunate to have, the Weingart Foundation, the Ballmer Group, California Community Foundation, who really kind of believed in the vision from early on. I think that, we're actually in the middle of finalizing a case study, which is really kind of documenting the history of the collaborative. One of the things that we recognized was that it was really kind of this perfect timing type of situation where, the Southeast was experiencing a number of challenges. There were a number of leaders kind of taking on, this responsibility to bring attention to the region. But then there was also philanthropy who was in the midst of really kind of changing and assessing how they were investing and how they were kind of really supporting in these different areas. And then so I think we have been very fortunate in that sense, but I think moving forward, it is challenging, right? Because you're asking someone to believe in in systemic change that may not happen until the future, right? It's not this simple, like, are we going to be able to do it by tomorrow? And the answer is like, probably not, right? And I think when you really kind of focus on the data, and I'm a big data nerd, so I will always mention data. If you really kind of look at data as an opportunity to learn, it kind of takes away what we have known for so long in the nonprofit sector as like, you look at data as a punitive, kind of idea, right? Like, were you successful or were you not successful? And, if we really kind of, it forces us to redefine what failure looks like. And what I love to, I think we've talked about this in social innovation too, like, failing forward, right? Like, just because we this initiative did not meet all these goals doesn't mean that we didn't learn through this process, and that we may just need to go back and redesign a portion of it, but it doesn't mean that we just toss it out. And then, so I think it's really kind of asking people to, believe in something that you may not be able to see in the next year or two.
Well, that's really good.
The reason why we love to show the map is because when people think about the Southeast, they are also thinking about a larger geographic area than what we as a collaborative have selected. We often get questions about, why is Commerce not part of it? Why is Compton not part of it? And I think that was a strategic decision that took about a year to even result in these specific areas. But to answer your question, we are, because we're really kind of grounded on that regional identity piece, these cities are extremely small cities, right? So we have spent a lot of time just building relationships with local, elected officials, really kind of explaining like what our goal is. I think oftentimes, the challenge that we're experiencing is that in these cities, the elected officials and council members are not there full time. They're only there part time, and most of them are actually working full time jobs, and then this is their part time job, right? And then so it poses some of the challenges when we're thinking, oh, we need to, for example, right now with the census, we need to convene all the elected officials to talk about all of our strategies around are we going to ensure a complete count of the Southeast, but we can't host those events unless it's a Saturday or unless it's like evening events, at which point it also has an impact on us, right? So it has also forced us to really kind of, step away from the typical like 9 to 5, that's when you host events, that's when you schedule meetings, because that's it doesn't apply to the Southeast. So we have to just be, I know we hosted a census elected official back in March on a Friday at like 5 p.m. Right, and then and we were able to, have most of the cities represented in that room. But it's really kind of about, building those relationships, really kind of being at the, at the forefront of it, and having those conversations and explaining who we are, what we're here to do. And one of the things that has allowed us to also kind of just leverage and continue to build relationships has been our willingness to really kind of meet the needs. One of the biggest needs we found as we have been doing this work is that not a lot of people know about the Southeast, but also not a lot of people know about the organizations that are doing work in the Southeast. And we have, we launched a marketing piece that really kind of, a newsletter highlighting everybody's work in the Southeast, so that it's not just like, we're only going to highlight our work as a collaborative or just our 12 members, but we're going to highlight all the events that are taking place, because if I'm just finding out about this, I have a feeling not a lot of the residents also know about those opportunities, right? And then it also allows us to then, really kind of bring further attention to the Southeast, and that there is a lot of great work happening. Is just, in the nonprofit needs assessment, that's a lot of what the nonprofit said. Like, we're great at building relationships with community and with residents. We're not great at marketing ourselves or telling them, we don't have social media. How do you use that, right? So, it's become this, how do we then fill that gap and fill that need? Which now, we often get emails from all the elected officials, both at the local level, but also at the, at the state level, and where they're saying, hey, can you share this event with your network? And then so we continue to leverage those opportunities to really kind of build relationships with them, and really kind of have sometimes uncomfortable conversations. Some of the work that we have done through our civic engagement work has actually been carried out by our members. So early on, we hosted a number of charlas, so community conversations around transportation, government accountability, and the census. And then so that was actually led by Alliance for a Better Community, and with I know them by the acronyms SEDC. And then so they kind of really led the efforts in like, planning the events, getting, the community outreach aspects. So really kind of leveraging our partners and their networks as well to really kind of reach the community. HSA, Human Services Association, is one of the largest childcare providers in the Southeast, but not a lot of people know about them, but they have a massive reach, right? So really kind of leveraging our resources and sharing resources. HSA always provides like childcare at all of our events so that we can make sure that, if families are coming, that they have somewhere safe to keep their child, which I benefit from because as a single mom, I always bring my kids. So I'm like, thank you. So I think it's really kind of, that has been some of the work that we've led. We've also developed other relationships through our partners, right? We hosted a series of nonprofits workshops, some of which, including a data workshop with Caroline and your team here around the NDSC platform, right? And they were fortunate, I was fortunate enough to have, the opportunity to bring you to SELA and kind of really open up these workshops, right? So really leveraging our partners within SELA, but also outside of SELA, and bring resources to the region that way. Our 12 organizations represent our steering committee members, right? So they are decision makers for us. So anytime that I am making a decision for the collaborative, it needs to be approved by the 12 members. That is one of the, often challenges because all of these organizations have their own individual missions and their own individual goals. But they have all made a commitment for the region, right? To really kind of work collectively to uplift the Southeast area. We often support their events, but we also, have discussed, different collaborations like where are they? The Pat Brown Institute leads most of our research work. So they're currently doing a community survey, which is really kind of focusing on what is the lived experience in the Southeast, right? So it's one thing to say, oh, this population, is predominantly Latino, there's this type of needs based on what the data has gathered, but it's another to ask the residents, what is it like for you to live in this area, right? And I think as we continue to gather that information, it allows us to really kind of change also our perspectives because what we see as an issue may not necessarily be something they identify as a priority issue to them. And I think that we continue to see through research and some of the community engagement work that we're doing there. But our members, are very, very active. We meet once a month. And even within that, there's we have a number of committees. So we have a Civic Engagement Committee, a Nonprofit Committee, a Governance Committee. All those committees meet in between the next steering committee. So, this morning we had a governance committee, and then after this, I'm going to a civic engagement committee. So that's where like a lot of the conversations happen around like strategy and the implementation of the work. And then at the steering committee level, that's where all the final decisions are made. We rely on a lot of our members for that type of information. We're not there yet. We're actually in the process of trying to actually, get funding to develop our own data management system because right now we don't have a data management system. So as we continue to do this work and, we've gathered a lot of data, we have a lot of research, but it's all in Excel files, right? Like that's where, so we need to be able to like put this all in a data management system that will allow us to really kind of enhance and increase our impact moving forward. But that's, the community survey is the first step for us in kind of getting that feedback at a massive scale. We've done community feedback through like our charlas and our community events, but not, at a larger scale. So the community survey will be one of our first areas to do that. And we have a, collaborative member agreements with each of the organization. We have an operating guidelines that we have kind of developed, but we also know that it's evolving as we're kind of shifting priorities. One of the biggest conversations for us right now as a collaborative is what is our role in this region, right? Because we understand a lot of our organizations are actually service providers, right? And they're providing a lot of this, work and carry out a lot of work in the region. So it's an area that we have to have very honest conversations about. Is it that we produce, programmatic pieces, or is it that we are a convener and a network builder for the region, right? Like, what is our role? Because there is also, and we understand that there's going to be concerns from whether it's our members or outside, organizations that may perceive us as like kind of coming in and taking over, right? Where it's like, no, we're here to kind of all work together, but we have to be very strategic in the way we do that. But in terms of just the competition, I think we have built a very open space where we're very transparent with each other. We kind of don't leave the meetings without really kind of addressing tough conversations. And I think oftentimes that's something that has come up with as we're finishing our case study, that oftentimes we don't talk about the things that we should be talking about, right? Like, we question trust. Like, do we all really trust each other? Like, these, conversations that we should be having, because then it allows us to create that space of transparency and accountability that we truly believe the collaborative can move forward.
So on that point, just thinking about, for example, like, have you seen, like, with the elected officials, they say, well, we're already part of the Gateway COG, the Council of Government, so, we're going to just continue to show up at those meetings, and I just don't have time to participate in SELA as well, because these are both collaborative enterprises, and I already have this one that I'm connected to. Have you had people kind of respond in terms of bandwidth or something like that? They're just like, well, that's great you're doing that, but I just can't be a part because I'm already a part of this, or...
No, I haven't experienced that much. I think I've experienced more so can the SELA Collaborative lead this? Or can you, take on this? And we're like, well, we can't, there's already this group, so we can collaborate with other folks. But I think we're trying to be very cautious of just kind of being perceived as an organization that's going to just come in and like bulldoze their way through everything, right? Because our relationships are important, and I think that's something that for me, both at a professional and personal level, I value, right? Like, just being able to have very strong, trusting relationships that are grounded on accountability and transparency, and I think that allows us to really kind of create meaningful conversations. A lot of what we've seen and experienced in terms of like, even elected officials saying, hey, are you going to do a convening on water issues, or are you going to do a convening on this, and kind of really kind of looking to us to guide those conversations has been great. But I think it also, like, then we're responding with we have a bandwidth issue. Like, I only have a team it's 4 of us, right, as a SELA team that are, right now we have taken on we are the census lead for the Southeast region, so we are doing a lot of work, and we're coordinating everyone in that region to really kind of ensure a complete count. So that has definitely proven to be quite the massive undertaking. I've done a lot of work in nonprofit organizations. I am a huge advocate of education. I've spent a lot of my time just doing, education work. But I've also seen the challenges when those organizations go away, right? And what it leaves behind. I think for me, in just my journey, finishing my doctoral program really kind of left me in this position of like, okay, what do you do now? And for me, wanting to really kind of do something that I love and that is true to who I am, and that is, a network builder. Like, I love leveraging relationships and really kind of building relationships. Say, hey, did you know so-and-so is doing that, right? It comes so natural to me for, to say, hey, NDSC exists. Why don't you all know about this? Like, well, how do we, bring them into the area and make sure that everybody has access to this? So for me, I think being able to see an organization that truly looks at data as an opportunity to learn and to grow and to really kind of enhance the impact, right? But also an opportunity to work with multiple, sectors and really continue to really strengthen my skills, because I think I've had experience in multiple of those sectors, but not to the, to the capacity that I have now, which I think gives me a whole other perspective as to why certain things happen the way they do, and how do we then kind of, use the position that we're in as a collaborative to really advance work, not just for one specific community, but for an entire region. Because this was, really kind of a pilot program at the beginning, and we were like, okay, let's see, we have this big visions of what we want for the Southeast and what we hope to see, but we also know that it may not happen in 3 years, right? That it may take a lot of time, and I think in that process we're really kind of learning through all the information that we're gathering, right? Like the nonprofit needs assessment, realizing there's 560 nonprofits really kind of goes against our, assumption that there was no one in the Southeast, right? Which we also heard from philanthropy. There's no one to fund in the Southeast, therefore we're not funding there. And now we're saying, well, there's 560 organizations. So now what do we do, right? But I think that also caused us to go, well, wait a minute, because if there's so many organizations, when it comes to the census, there's 250 faith-based organizations in the Southeast. Our community has said their number one trusted messenger is the faith-based community. So what do we now do with that data, right? Because now we know there's 250 and we know community trusts churches when it comes to the census. So how do we then collaborate and build relationships with them to really ensure that the community is receiving the message, right? So, and I always, with data, I'm always reminded of I partner with the MSW department, and one of the things that I used to do, because I love data, was I would tell my data consultant, I want to know all this information about our students, right? Because I used to, prior to my work here, I was with I Have a Dream Foundation, and we used to sponsor the kids in kinder and then follow them all the way into college, and then so I would want to gather all this data. And I remember our consultant once saying, like, just because you have the capacity to gather the data doesn't mean that you should, because then it raises questions of then now that this is happening, now you have a responsibility to do something about it, right? And then so I think as we're looking at data, it's how do we use that data to inform us and not force ourselves to kind of a strategy or a vision that may evolve as we're kind of gathering information, and it allows us to be flexible to do so. I think in any relationship, the way you build trust is by, accountability and transparency. You have to be very honest, and I think it's the way that you share the information is the way the context matters often, right? This is why data numbers is just numbers, but when you really kind of put the qualitative piece and give the context, then it tells a bigger story, right? I think that's the piece that for us is how do we use that mixed method approach to really tell the story of the Southeast, which is why the community survey is so important, right? Because when we look at the data, we know that the Southeast has so many challenges, right? From environmental challenges to education challenges, and the needs of the community are not being met. But then we also have to, put that in conjunction with what is the community saying, right? And what do they see as their priority? Because we may say there's, 5 organizations that are doing water work, but if the community is saying we've never heard about this, then there's a disconnect, right? And then so really kind of using that and building those relationships, here's what we've gathered, let's talk about this, and then let's figure out how do we collaborate to really kind of move the work forward, right? But not from a, this organization said they were going to do this, they failed, right? But more so, there's something that's keeping, us from being able to achieve that. So let's look at that. We definitely talk with our current funders, which are the Weingart Foundation, CCF, Balmer Group, First 5 LA, and Citibank has also provided funding to us. But I think a lot of what we've realized is that we're really kind of building also the relationships even with our own funders who have been extremely generous and not only being our funders, but also being thought partners to us. They have convened a number of we put together a number of funders convenings where we have been given the opportunity to speak and share about the work that we're doing, some of the things that we have learned through this work, but also our vision into the future. And then so really kind of leveraging our relationships again, and continuing to nurture them so that we can continue to do this, work forward. I think one of the pieces for us is how do we begin to have the conversations with other funders that may not necessarily be as familiar with the model, right? But oftentimes for us, it has come through the resources and the relationships that our current funders have.
That's great. So I have a question related to kind of the trying to catalyze power within the region, and if I've heard you correctly, that seems like one of the goals, and we can see it actualized in the Census Project in many ways. When you are confronted with, let's say, issues within the community that say we need to do something better about, let's say, how the Santa Ana station is going to be part of the region, and some people are worried about housing issues, and others are really excited about economic development opportunities and so forth. And or, kind of like if people identified, our real problem is that our retail sales tax base is too low vis-a-vis our neighbors. How have you to date kind of tried to say, okay, well, we can't actually do anything internally in the region. We actually have to activate power outside the region in order to see the change that we want to see for ourselves. Have you started to try to build tissue outside the region, or right now you're at the phase where you're kind of...
I think we're still at the phase where we're building the foundation within the region. I think leveraging a lot of our partners has been key to how we're advancing the work. The work that we did in the last year and a half or so has been really kind of on transportation, which has brought up those questions of, there's specific organizations that are very focused on housing, like how do we address the housing shortage, right? And then there's the organizations that are focused on, well, with this investment, there's potential displacement, gentrification. So how do we then, create, and for us has been our policy and advocacy agenda that we develop from the ground up and from the feedback that we gather, not just from residents, but also from stakeholders in the region. Like, what is it that should be prioritized? And then we delivered this policy and advocacy agenda to all of our partners and really kind of building those opportunities for other organizations to kind of step into those roles who are, and I think this is where that sense of competition may come in, right? Where if we're leading a conversation or work around housing, but we know that there's, other 5 organizations that are doing the same, why not collaborate, right? Like, why not come to the table and work together versus, or is it that our role is just to convene them and then they carry out the work, right? So I think those are the pieces that we're still very much in developing, like what does it look like for us versus, our network, and one of the things that we have approved and we're getting ready to launch is what we're calling our network partners. So it's really kind of formalizing our relationships with all the organizations in the region whose missions align with the collaborative, and then really kind of beginning to build that network in the region. I think shared measurements is often, for me, it's rewarding, right? Like, I love seeing the data. But this says shared measurements, meaning we're going to share this data with our partners. And I think that's where it becomes sometimes tricky because data is power, right? And data gives you the opportunity to do a lot of other things, right? And then so I think, that's an area where how do we, really have our partners think about data sharing as an opportunity for us to strengthen our ability to, achieve collective impact, right? And I think that's something that people are still very much uncomfortable with, right? Where it's like, you want me to give you what? So you want me to give you all my data? And I don't know that people necessarily want to freely do that, right? So I think that's an area that I think when you look at it, it's great. The process of gathering data is great. It tells a story. But I think the mechanics of having a shared measurement system is sometimes very difficult, right? And I think, a lot of the collective impact research, has also shown, like, even with these initiatives that have been around for more than 10 years, the data piece is something that's still very difficult to actually achieve. The other thing I think for me has been very, very rewarded is the continuous communication, right? Part of that is building that trust. Like, how do you share, continuously communicate? And I think, I'm sure my collaborative members will tell you, like, I am notorious for over communicating. I'm like, this is what's happening. But I think for me it's like, it comes down to building trust, right? And if we have this, relationships, we'll continue to be in communication because it's for the sake of the region. It's not for my self-gratification.
Well, this question I didn't tee up in my emails before, but, and so you can feel comfortable or not comfortable to answer it. But, there's many of our students, especially our graduate students in our MPA and other programs who, want to be sitting in your chair someday leading a network or nonprofit organization. Do you have any leadership lessons for them based on your experiences so far? And it can, connect to the kind of work you're doing now, too.
Yeah. That's funny. I'm like, I think about leadership a lot. That's where my organizational leadership hat comes in. And I think for me, one of the things that I, learned through my program, and I think it just made so much sense to me, was this idea of, we all know the golden rule, right? Treat everybody the way you want to be treated. But what I learned was that there's the platinum rule, treat everybody the way they want to be treated, because the golden rule assumes that the way you want to be treated is the way everybody else also may feel respected or may be, feel heard. And I think a lot of what this work for me, which is why it's so rewarding for me, is that I have an opportunity to build relationships with so many, leaders from so many different perspectives. And I think it's definitely challenged even my own ability to think about how you build relationships, how you build trust, and how you collaborate, right? And I think within that is that being able to really differentiate between cooperation and collaboration, right? Cooperation is just, we're going to move this table together. Collaboration, it means, I'm going to pull the weight of something and you're going to pull the weight of, and then we're going to meet and then we're going to talk about this, right? And I think that's the hard part, like the accountability that comes with that. And we all say we want to be held accountable, and but what does that look like is different from all of us. And I think that has been for me, the most rewarding piece, that I have the opportunity to work with all these different leaders and learn from them. But also continue to grow, right? And just kind of see a lot of what I've experienced kind of come to fruition. It's very rewarding. Because the collaborative came about because of government accountability and lack of transparency in the region, I think we have been very, very mindful of the way we lead the work so that it's not perceived as not being transparent, right? And one of the things that, we had to have a very difficult conversation around was the fact that if we as a collaborative are funded to carry out the work and we're funding our members, could that, for the members to lead the work, could that potentially be perceived out of context as self-dealing, right? As us only investing in our own members, right? And that was a difficult conversation to have, because it was never it was never really like the intention behind that. It was more so, we need to get this work off the ground, and the only way we can do it without an executive director, because at the time I was not there, and the collaborative the members deserve a lot of credit. They have done this work for almost 10 years by themselves without a team, right? And really kind of working together and finding ways to kind of advance the work. But once the funding came, it was now we're responsible to actually execute this work. And the only way that they could was through being able to kind of lead it themselves, right? Which could be perceived by others as something more than that, right? And I think that was a very difficult conversation, because coming in, I was like, can we talk about this? Because I know the history and they know the history, and we don't want, we have to be very mindful of what that could mean for us as a collaborative. And I think part of it is like, how do we carry out the work, right? And I think it goes back to my earlier comment around, we are very much still thinking about what is our role as a collaborative. Is our role to carry out the work? If we're saying we want to increase civic engagement, does that mean we lead everything? Or does that mean we support other organizations who have the history, the capacity, but need the additional resource to actually magnify what they are experts in, right? And I think that has been an area that for us, even just kind of really pushing the idea of what an expert is, right? Sometimes we only think of experts as, our organizational leaders, but we have a lot of residents that are experts in their own life because it impacts them, right? All the work that we do will have an impact on them. I may not be here in a few years, but those residents continue to live there. So how do we empower them to then really kind of drive that change in the region?